Today's featured guest is highly regarded among the mainline media. The New York Post says if Nostradamus were alive today, he'd have a hard time keeping up with Gerald. When CNN wants to know about the top trends, they ask him. And, of course, one of our favorite magazines, The Economist, says there's not a better trend forecaster than Gerald Celente. CNBC says the man knows what he's talking about. Well, Gerald is widely known also for predicting the 1987 stock market crash, the dot-com implosion there, and the gold bull market of 2001, plus the real estate bubble and the panic of last year. Welcome to the show, Gerald.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to begin with a discussion on trends. This is your hallmark, and it certainly is an important concept. I've been a big proponent for years now of market-related trend following. I try to tell my folks that a trend is a long market cycle which seems to be the result of a shift in underlying societal awareness. You know, unlike the standard academic model that we all learned in school, which insists that information is perfectly available to everyone at the same time, trends disprove this thesis, and I think that people will see that they can wake up to new opportunities, people do individually, but then as a crowd near the end of the trend, the whole herd comes rushing in. And we often refer to this stage as a bubble. Gerald, why is it that the cognoscenti and the mainline media sometimes seem to have such a difficult time understanding trends?
Well, they're not following the current events that are forming future trends. They report on them, and then they forget them and they move on to the next hot story. They're not educated in trends, nor is most of our society. For example, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, not a trend research laboratory among them. Isn't it amazing? But boy, do they have a lot of history teachers there. You know, and so it's like now, for example, here we are going through the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and what do? They look back to the Great Depression for the answers. You know, that's like fighting the Crimean War in World War I and fighting World War I and World War II, and et cetera. So we're not a forward-looking society. The future is off limits. It's not allowed. There's no cabinet secretary of trends. And there should be. Who's looking ahead? So they make decisions each day without assessing the implications.
And you know, I'm rereading Nassim Taleb's seminal work. I think he would have been such a great addition to this conversation because he totally agrees with you that the world is far too dynamic. These static models that so much of academia are relying on, not just academia, let's not beat up on them. I mean, the government too, as you point out. But the world is so much more complex than we seem to give it credit for. I mean, we just can't put it into these standard sort of normal distribution bell curves. Those tails are so much fatter, aren't they, in the real world?
Well, yeah, economics, I mean, the whole profession it's close to sorcery. You look at the failures of the economic models, and then when they'll say things like, well, we have to build confidence in the economy. Well, wait a minute. Confidence is a qualitative, not a quantitative measurement. So if you're going to throw qualitative into it, don't tell me about your quantitative models. And they keep insisting upon using this kind of language and this kind of thought to, quote, build confidence. And if it's strictly an economic model, it shouldn't have a confidence level in it. So they're not looking at the multi-dimensional aspects of a trend. And that's what we do differently than most. So when we look at an economic problem or an economic fact or an economic issue, we take into account changes in society, political influences, global dynamics, consumer, geopolitical, environmental. It goes across the board. As Chief Seattle said, all things are connected like the blood which unites us all, but they keep looking one-dimensionally.
That's a perfect segue into your global nomic trend forecasting methods here. You know, you monitor over 300 fields searching for these new trends to form. That seems like a huge undertaking. Could you give us a little better idea of what it is that you're searching for in future trends, how you identify, track, and forecast these trends?
Well, I'll give you an example with a current event forming future trends. You know, something that an economist would glance over and not read was the Pope's visit to Israel. And the implications, the ramifications, what was said, what isn't being said, what they like, what they don't like. And then we take it into context of other religious issues going on. Anti-Islamic movements, the Israeli invasion of Gaza, how this is all going to play out. You take it to geopolitical. And so we're looking at this and watching it closely. We don't know how it's going to end up, but we do know that at this moment there is a lot of controversy going on. And so now we're seeing a building up of religious wars. We're looking at increases. When you look at the data, for example, you're seeing more and more increases in anti-Semitism. How does this play in with the Pope's recent visit to Israel that was viewed with such controversy? So that's something that most people would say, that's off limits. Well, we don't care. We're political atheists, and we only look at facts for what they are, not the way they want them to be. We don't take an ideological stand. I make it very clear in my travels around the world and with my speeches in the United States. While I hold a U.S. passport, I consider myself a citizen of the world. There is no salvation for the hypocrite, and that's it.
Goldseek, you might say we have no axe to grind, because it seems like so many folks and researchers, even economists, if you will, or sorcerers, it seems like we become bogged down in a morass with this political nonsense that folks get involved in. And frankly, you can miss out on the truth or on the trends there. And I think that's a good segue here into your top trends of 2009. Of course, you correctly predicted the panic of '08 that caught millions of people off guard, and now you're calling for a collapse of 2009.
Well, I must say the collapse has been forestalled. Again, no one could predict the future because there are too many wild cards. There are, acts of God, acts of nature, schemes that are undreamed of.
That's right. So you're really just putting the probabilities in your favor, aren't you? That's the key there.
Exactly. So in our wildest dream, we would have never thought that the government would have become what's turning toward what